Hello and welcome to another episode where we attempt to fall asleep, but we succeed because we have the help of Habibi Spice. Tonight, we are going to be delving into our detective mode. Don't worry, you don't have to do any work. I will be doing most of the work because we are going to be reading Sherlock Holmes or Herlock Holmes if you are cool. I unfortunately got sick last week with COVID this week, and I am on medication that they gave me. And this medication is making me very, very tired. It's called Paxlovid. So, if you will excuse me, I might fall asleep as well with you. This book was provided by a viewer as well. It is a for children only, it says, illustrated just for kids edition. Sherlock Holmes. I have seen this episode on the TV show, but I have not read the writing of it. So we are going to be delving into the writing of it together. British countryside, maybe. This is going to be the Hound of the Baskervilles. The Hound of the Baskervilles. Sounds so cinematic. Now I know there is no hound in front of me. There is but a cat. But in Baskervilles there might be a hound, and we need to be prepared for him. How it all started. You ready? Legend has it that a giant glowing dog with fiery eyes haunted generations of the Baskerville family in Dartmoor, Devonshire, England. Where else would it be if not England? British author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was inspired by this old Dartmoor tale when he had the idea for his third and most popular Sherlock Holmes adventure, The Hound of the Baskervilles, which was first published more than 100 years ago. It's a long time. In Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's tale, Dr. James Mortimer brings the news of Sir Charles Baskerville's demise to 221B Baker Street, where Sherlock Holmes lived, hoping that the famous detective Sherlock Holmes can crack the case. Holmes stays in London and sends his trusty sidekick Dr. Watson to investigate and protect Sir Charles's heir, Sir Henry, at Baskerville Hall. Even though Dr. Watson steers clear of the swampy Grimpen mire, spooky things start to happen. Ooh. The neighbors act peculiar. There's an escaped convict on the loose, and people say they've seen a ghostly, glowing hound running over the hills at night. Interesting, huh? Very, very interesting. Let's see if it is interesting. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, except when he was up all night, was sitting at the breakfast table. I stood up and picked up the walking stick that our visitor has left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick, knobby piece of wood. Was it now? Near the top of it was a wild silver band nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, MRCS, from his friends of the CCH. Am I supposed to know what that means? Was engraved upon it was the date 1884. It was the sort of walking stick an old-fashioned family doctor used to carry. Nicely made and important looking, like me. Well, Watson, what do you make of it? Holmes was sitting with his back to me and hadn't turned around once. How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head. I have, at least, a very shiny silver coffee pot in front of me, said he. But tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's walking stick? Since we have been so unlucky as to miss him and have no idea why he was here, the item he left can give us clues. Look closely at the walking stick and tell me about the person who owns it. So he's like training him to be more inquisitive. I think, said I, that Dr. Mortimer is a successful elderly doctor and well respected since he received this walking stick as a gift. Good, said Holmes. Excellent. I think, also, it's likely that he's a country doctor who spends his time visiting patients on foot. Why so? Because this walking stick, though originally a handsome one, has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a city doctor carrying it. The iron tip is worn down. It is clear that he has done a great amount of walking with it. Perfectly sound, said Holmes. And then again, there is the Friends of the CCH engraving. I should guess that to be the something hunt. He must have given its members some medical help and received a small award in return. Really, Watson, you outdo yourself, said Holmes, pushing back his chair. You really sell yourself short sometimes, I have to say, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your debt. He had never said as much before, and it felt good to hear this praise, rare though it was. I was proud too, to think that I had used his way of thinking to learn so much about the visitor. He now took the walking stick from my hands and examined it for a few minutes with his naked eyes. Then, with an expression of interest, he carried the cane to the window. He looked over it again with a magnifying glass. Interesting, though elementary, said as he returned to his favorite corner of the sofa. There are certainly one or two indications upon the walking stick. It gives us several clues. So he's like, you're not that good, Habibi, hold on. Has anything escaped me? I asked with some self-importance. I trust that there is nothing meaningful that I have overlooked. I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were wrong. When I said that you outdid yourself, I meant, to be honest, that when I heard your mistaken ideas, I was guided towards the truth. Not that you are entirely wrong in this case. This man is certainly a country doctor, and he walks quite a lot. Then I was right. To that extent. But that was all. No, my dear Watson, not all. By no means all. I would suggest, for example, that an award to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than from a hunting club. And that when the initials CC are placed before the hospital, they very likely stand for Charing Cross. You might be right. Very probably. And if we take this as a working hypothesis, We have a starting place to learn more about this unknown visitor. Well then, supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what else can we learn? Does nothing come to mind? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man worked as a doctor in town before going to the country. I think that we might take it a bit further. Look at it in this light. When would it be more likely to get a gift like this? When would his friends come together to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment when Dr. Mortimer stopped working at the hospital in order to start a practice for himself. We know he received an award. We believe there has been a change from a town hospital to a country practice. Is it then stretching our inference too far to say that the award happened at the time that he left? It certainly seems probable. Now, he could not have been on the staff of the hospital, since only a man well established in a London practice could be on staff. And in that case, he wouldn't have left for the country. What was he then? If he was in the hospital and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student, and he left 5 years ago. The date is on the walking stick. So your idea of a family doctor now vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson. What we see now is a young fellow under 30, friendly, unambitious, and absent-minded. A doctor who walks with his favorite dog, which I should describe roughly as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I left in amazement as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his sofa, looking up at the ceiling. As to the part about the dog, I have no way of checking you, said I, but at least it is not difficult to find out a few details about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and looked up his name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could be our visitor. I read his record aloud. Mortimer James, MRCS, 1882. Grimpen, Dartmoor, Devon, house surgeon, from 82 to 84, at Charing Cross Hospital, winner of the Jackson Prize for Comparative Pathology, with an essay entitled Is Disease a Reversion? Corresponding member of the Swedish Pathological Society, author of Some Freaks of Atavism, Do We Progress? Journal of Psychology 1883, medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Sorsley, and High Barrow. Jesus Christ, this guy. Not to mention of that local hunting club, Watson, said Holmes with a mischievous smile. But a country doctor, as you smartly observed. I think that I am right about my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember right, friendly, unambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only a friendly person in this world who receives these kinds of gifts. Only an unambitious one who leaves a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his walking stick and not his business card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog? He has been in the habit of carrying the stick behind his master. Because it's a heavy stick, the dog has held it tightly by the middle, and the marks of his teeth are easy to see. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between these marks, is too wide in my opinion for a terrier and not wide enough for a mastiff. It may have been, yes, by Jove, It is a curly-haired spaniel. He had gotten up and paced the room as he spoke. Now he stopped by the window. There was such confidence in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. "My dear fellow, how can you possibly be so sure of that?" "For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep and hear the doorbell ring of its owner." "Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He is a doctor like you, and your being there may help me." Now is the dramatic moment of fate, Watson, when you hear a step upon the stair, and you know not whether for good or ill. What does James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, the specialist in crime? "Come in." So the man has arrived. The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I had expected a typical country doctor. He was a very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out dramatically from his face. His two sharp grey eyes were set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was dressed in a professional but rather untidy fashion, for his coat was stained and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long back was already bent, and he walked with a forward thrust of his head and a general air of friendliness. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the walking stick in Holmes's hand, and he ran toward it with an exclamation of joy. "I am so very glad," he said. "I was not sure whether I had left it here or at the post office. I would not lose that walking stick for the world." "An award, I see," said Holmes. "Yes, sir. From Charing Cross Hospital. From one or two friends there for a wedding present." "Dear, dear, that's bad," said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in surprise. "Why was it bad?" "Only that you have disproved our little deductions." "Your wedding, you say?" "Yes, sir, I married, and so left the hospital, and with it all hopes of a consulting practice. It was necessary to make a home of my own." Come, we are not so far wrong, after all," said Holmes. "And now, Dr. James Mortimer, Mr. Sir, Mr. A humble MRCS, and a man of sharp mind, clearly. A dabbler in science, Mr. Holmes, a picker of shells on the shores of the great unknown ocean. Can I guess that this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, whom I am addressing, and not— No, this is my friend Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I came to you, Mr. Holmes, because I am suddenly faced with a most serious and extraordinary problem. Tell me, Dr. Mortimer, how can I be of assistance?" So this was the opening for The Hound of Baskerville. If it is not a very interesting introduction to the character that we are about to witness, I do not know what is. Not only did we learn about this new character through his object, but we learned about our characters through their perception of his object. And then we put them all together for a beautiful moment where they meet to see who's right and who was wrong. But now, if you cannot wait to know what happened in the story, I can read more next time if you would like, or you can just watch the TV show as well. But as for today, I am not feeling very good to keep reading more. I must rest, and you must rest as well, I would assume. So get some good night's sleep and think about the Hound of the Baskervilles. Good night, Sherlock Holmes, حبيبي.